Hello everyone and welcome back to ThursDev. I'm your host Luke, and today I wanted to continue our series on game balancing by looking at a more practical and mathematical approach to balancing specific values and statistics in games. This is a method that I've employed in the creation of game economies to fairly decent effect. Today we're going to be talking about the top-down balancing method, or macrobalancing. This video will be talking a little bit less about the theory of game balancing and motivations, and more focused on a specific results-driven and very much math-heavy approach, so I apologize in advance if it comes across as a little drier than some of the other videos in our series. But I do sincerely hope that this talk about balancing methodology helps other designers who are working on stats in a game and could use a nudge in the right direction. Fair warning, there will be Excel spreadsheets. To start off, I'd like to talk about where this particular method will be useful. No individual system of creating an array of values is going to be one size fits all, of course. Top-down balancing really shines when you're creating a game with progressing stats or values that have an individual interplay. This can be used in game economies where you want to control the flow of in-game resources through a number of different sources while also creating an outflow of those resources. When creating a persistent game economy in a multiplayer asynchronous build and battle game, there needs to be a balance between resources generated from a structure, stolen from other players, awarded as performance rewards, and gained through cooperative multiplay, against the outflow of the same resources to building structures and secondary resource sinks like unit upkeep. Within these, there's also the balance within structures, in this case in resource generators, storage, defensive structures, and the cost ratios thereof. Though I've used it primarily for developing game economy, it's also a valuable tool in creating any number set that aims to build a number of coexisting values, each advancing over the course of a game, while maintaining balance but avoiding linear values. This can also be applied in the context of an RPG, for example, in giving the player characters some in-game money, won through combat, found in chests, awarded from minigames and so on, and spent on equipment, consumables, lodging, and so on. Or even balancing inflow of experience awarded to the player through things like combat, quest rewards, and exploration, for example, to gate leveling, as anyone who plays RPGs knows that both over and under-leveled play is less fun. The core of this particular methodology, which I alternatively call top-down balancing or macro-balancing, is a simple matter of beginning with a series of endpoints of some specific values in a game, then defining goals and plugging in a few variables to generate a series of numbers that we can then use as a basis to start our balancing process. We begin at our endpoint, which is to say the maximum possible value of each, and use that as our baseline, as opposed to working our way through a series of levels and balancing each of them individually from the start. By defining a set of goals for the nature of the value's interaction, we can much more easily create a set of curves that at least mathematically achieves these goals and properly defines the curves that we want. For this episode, I'm going to start with a fairly simple example to get us accustomed to using the macro-balancing method, with the intent to then, in next week's episode, take a look at the persistent strategy build and battle game, like Clash of Clans and my own studio's recent project Monstrosity. Today though, let's take a look at character leveling using the macro-balancing method. I'm going to touch on two aspects of character leveling in this particular example, mapping out the acquisition of experience and how to find a set of usable XP reward values to give our player while progressing them at the rate that we want. We'll assume that this is a single player game with a single character that always is receiving full experience from any given encounter, so as to not mire ourselves in calculating things like experience subdivision, which honestly by and large is no longer done anyway. As designers, we want to accommodate both the casual and the completionist, so that means as often as not, in most role-playing games, the most common occurrence is the player consistently leveling through the course of the game's core quests, reaching a respectively middling level by the time that they reach and complete the final quest in the main thread. Usually the player will be significantly below the level cap unless they're purposely postponing the main quest in order to do all of the side quests before progressing at any given point in time. Modern open-world adventures that allow the player to continue to adventure beyond the main quest frequently allow even more leeway in this respect, and often also include challenge quests beyond the main one to give the player a source of advanced leveling beyond the soft cap at the game's end. In the tradition of the physics question, where we assume our subject matter is a perfect sphere in a vacuum though, we'll assume a linear narrative with no post-ending content. Whether the player continues beyond that point is moot, so we won't bother thinking about what happens after for now. In the macro-balancing method, we'd first define our maximum level, as well as a soft cap, as well as some arbitrary experience point assignment. Let's say that our game allows the player to level up to 50 if they complete the majority of the game's content in the game. Our ideal situation would allow the player to just barely have reached level 50 by endgame if they're a completionist, which should be the ideal situation. No grinding, just straight play through all of the game's content with a consistent encounter rate. We'd begin by defining an experience point or XP curve for reaching level 50. There are various ways to create this curve, some more complicated than others. Fortunately, as this should theoretically inform every other calculation automatically beyond this point, it shouldn't be a large issue to change it later. As I've been playing it a lot recently, I'm going to use the simple formula that's used in The Witcher 3. 1000 XP to advance from level 1 to 2, and the previous level's difference plus 1000 for every subsequent level. Once we have our curve, we'll want to define a few variables. Our expected level at endgame, the number of individual main missions between the game's start and the final quest, and later we'll put in some numbers together for side quests. Let's assume that the player should be finishing the game around level 35 if they're playing straight through. This means that by looking at the amount of cumulative experience between level 1 and 35, we'll be able to see the amount of XP that we need to award over the course of the main quest, divided among the different methods of gaining experience. Beyond that, we can assume that all other experience to get to level 50 is reserved for content experienced outside the straight shot to the end. This way, we establish a pool of experience points that we can use to determine the value of the quests that we'll give to the player, as well as experience that will be awarded through regular play while attempting to reach that point. We need to subdivide the experience point pools to reflect separate sources of XP inflow. This can be done by assigning a ratio of XP devoted to each. Say questing accounts for 65% of your total XP gain, combat for 25%, and exploration for about 10% of our main play XP, and for our extra pool, a 50-30-20 split. We can determine values of quests by figuring out how many quests will be available, and a value curve for them from there. Let's say that we're going to be creating an epic main storyline that encompasses 70 individual missions, each leading one into the other. We'd take our questing XP budget for our main quest, and then create a curve along those 70 missions. To create a sense of consistent forward momentum, we can use the same curve created using our leveling XP. This way, each quest we complete will give us enough XP, while ramping properly, to achieve our XP goal for these quests. This same trick can be applied to our other values, though in the case of XP gained via combat, we'll want to determine from a much larger number of individual events, and we'll likely have to look into averaging out the XP reward values among monster types, unless we're eschewing randomness in encounters altogether, which would be a daunting task to say the least. This larger value can be eyeballed by taking the expected number of hours or minutes of gameplay spent in-game and assuming a number of encounters per hour of gameplay, then creating yet another curve through play milestones or by hour of play. Exploration can be further subdivided into ratioed sets of regions in a game, types of discoveries, or any other number of possibilities. Doling out all the remaining XP needed to get to level 50 is a simple matter of doing the exact same thing, just applied to different quests, and a number of different hours of play, as well as exploration of content that isn't considered necessary to finish the game. The options in all of these are only as limited as the person creating the game. This method of finding maximum values, defining a set of curves, and solving downward takes a significant amount of guesswork out of the creation of your game's experience rewards. The same can be applied to in-game money by solving equipment costs over the course of the game, consumables, cost of using inns, crafting components if you have crafting mechanics, and so on. This XP system only scratches the surface of how this method can be applied, and next week I intend to show you how it can be leveraged in creating a whole game economy using the now oh-so popular build-in battle genre. But until then, I wanted to thank you as always for joining me today. It's always a pleasure to have you drop in and enjoying the content that we create. If you aren't already a subscriber to our channel, consider doing so and you'll receive notifications at the whims of the YouTube gods and your personal settings, and we'll get the warm fuzzy feeling of knowing that someone out there is enjoying the things that we make. Regardless, however, thank you again for watching, and take care.